right now, in this moment, you are carrying something, a weight, a thought loop, a story you have told yourself 1,000 times. I am not good enough. I always fail. Nothing ever changes for me. It feels real, doesn't it? It feels like truth. But pause. Take a deep breath. What if I told you this is just a pattern? A conditioned response, like an old song playing in your mind, set on repeat for years. A song that was never yours to begin with. A song taught to you by past failures, by fear, by voices that never belonged to you. And yet you believe it. You live inside it. Every action, every hesitation, every excuse, it all stems from this pattern. But a pattern is not reality. The pattern is just a groove in your mind, a path walked so many times that it has become automatic. Think of an elephant tied to a small rope. When it was young, the rope was strong enough to hold it. It pulled, struggled, fought until one day it gave up. Now, fully grown, this massive, powerful being stays in place, not because the rope is strong, but because its mind believes it cannot break free. You are not the rope. You are not the past. You are the power that sees the pattern. And the moment you see it, something shifts. Take a look at your life. Where are you repeating the same choices, the same reactions, the same limitations? Where do you say, this is just how I am? Look closer. Do you see the rope? Now ask yourself, what happens if I take one step beyond it? A man once told me, I can never speak in front of people. I freeze. He had believed this story for years. But one day he stood up in a small group, trembling, heart pounding, and he spoke one sentence, just one, and everything changed, because in that moment he proved his pattern wrong. The mind resists change because it craves the familiar. It clings to what is known, even if what is known is suffering. But the present moment, the now, is always new. It does not carry your past. It does not hold your limits. It only asks, who are you willing to be right now? When the pattern calls, pause, breathe, do not react, just see it. In that moment of stillness, you create space, and in that space, you are free. The rope was never holding you, you were holding the rope, and now you can let go. A negative pattern feels like reality. It feels like an undeniable truth, something embedded deep within you, shaping your thoughts, actions, and decisions. But pause for a moment. What if that feeling is just an illusion? What if the things you believe about yourself, the doubts, the fears, the limitations, are not reality at all, but simply a well-rehearsed script your mind has learned to follow? Imagine a person who has spent years telling themselves, I'm not good enough. Each time they encounter a challenge, this thought arises, almost automatically. It feels so natural, so familiar, that they no longer question it. And because they believe it, they act in ways that reinforce it, hesitating, playing small, avoiding risks. But here's the truth. That belief was never a fact. It was a pattern formed through past experiences, perhaps from a failure, a rejection, or a single critical comment that took root in their mind. Over time, the mind repeated it so often that it became their reality. Think of a caged bird. If it has been confined for years, even when the door is opened, it hesitates. It does not fly to freedom, not because it cannot, but because it believes it is still trapped. This is exactly how negative patterns work. They condition you to believe you are stuck, when in reality you are free. The pattern creates an invisible boundary in your mind, one that you assume is real simply because you've never stepped beyond it. But the moment you recognize that this pattern is separate from who you are, something powerful happens. Awareness creates space. You begin to see the thought not as truth, but as a habit, an echo of the past, not a reflection of the present. And in that awareness, you gain the ability to choose. You can either continue following the old script or take a step beyond it, proving to yourself that you were never truly bound by it. The past does not define you unless you keep carrying it into the present. A pattern may feel like reality, but it is only a story your mind has practiced believing. And the moment you stop identifying with it, you begin to break free. Awareness is the key to breaking any cycle. The moment you see a pattern for what it is, you create distance between yourself and the habit that has been controlling you. Most people live their lives on autopilot, reacting the same way to the same triggers, making the same excuses, feeling the same limitations, and believing that this is simply who they are. But who you are is not the pattern. Who you are is the awareness that sees it. Imagine someone who always procrastinates. Every time they have an important task, they suddenly feel tired, distracted, or overwhelmed. They tell themselves, "I work better under pressure," or "I'll do it later," not realizing that this is just an old mental program running in the background. They don't decide to procrastinate, it happens automatically. But what if, just once, they paused? Instead of immediately obeying the impulse to delay, what if they simply noticed it? The moment they do, something shifts. They are no longer blindly following the pattern, they are watching it. And in that moment of watching, they gain the ability to choose something different. This is how all negative cycles begin to break, not by fighting them, not by forcing yourself to be different, but by becoming deeply aware of them. Awareness alone starts to weaken their power. When you can see your self-doubt as a pattern instead of a truth, it no longer feels as real. When you can observe your fears without immediately reacting to them, they lose their grip on you. Think about a spinning wheel. As long as it spins fast, it looks solid, unbreakable. But the moment it starts slowing down, you begin to see the gaps between the spokes. Awareness slows down your mental patterns, giving you the space to see them clearly for the first time. And once you see the pattern, you are no longer trapped inside it. Most people try to change by using willpower, by fighting against their own mind. But real change happens not through struggle, but through seeing. Seeing that the voice in your head telling you that you can't do something is not your voice, it is a conditioned response. seeing that the excuses, the fear, the hesitation are not who you are, but just habits your mind has practiced. And once you see them for what they are, you no longer have to obey them. You are not your thoughts. They come and go, constantly shifting, yet something within you remains unchanged. That something is awareness, the silent observer beneath all the noise. But for most people, thoughts feel like an undeniable truth. When a negative thought arises, I will fail, I am not good enough, I can't change. It doesn't feel like a passing mental event. It feels like reality itself. Imagine a cloudy sky. The clouds may be dark, heavy, and overwhelming, but above them the sky remains untouched, vast, and open. Your thoughts are like the clouds, constantly shifting, but who you truly are is the sky. The problem is most people identify so strongly with their thoughts that they forget the sky exists at all. They assume that every fear, every limitation, every self-doubt is an accurate reflection of who they are. But the truth is, thoughts are simply patterns formed by past experiences, influences, and conditioning. They do not define you unless you choose to believe them. Consider someone who grew up being told they were not smart. Every time they face a challenge, their mind repeats this story: I can't do this. If they believe the thought, they hesitate, give up, or avoid trying altogether. But what happens if for a single moment they question it? If they step back and observe, there's that thought again, but is it true? Suddenly they create space. They are no longer trapped inside the thought. They are watching it from the outside. And in that space they realize that just because a thought appears does not mean it must be followed. The mind is like a radio station playing in the background, but you are the one who decides whether to keep listening. A negative thought may arise, but you do not have to obey it. A fear may whisper to you, but you do not have to act on it. The moment you recognize this, you reclaim control. You step out of identification with the mind and into the power of presence. Most people think they need to fix their thoughts to change their lives. But you don't need to fix them. You just need to stop mistaking them for the truth. Thoughts will always come and go, but the real you is the awareness that sees them. And in that awareness, you are free. Change does not require massive leaps. It begins with one small action, one step beyond the familiar. The mind often convinces us that transformation must be dramatic, that we must wait for the perfect moment, the right motivation, or a complete shift in circumstances. But real change does not happen all at once. It happens in the small, seemingly insignificant moments when you choose to do something different, when you take a single step beyond your old pattern. Imagine a person who has always feared public speaking. Each time they are given an opportunity to speak, their mind immediately tells them, I can't do this, and their body reacts with nervousness and hesitation. For years, they avoid speaking, reinforcing the belief that they are incapable. Then one day, they decide to do something different. They don't give a long speech or step onto a grand stage. They simply raise their hand in a small meeting and say one sentence. That single moment may seem minor, but it is a crack in the old pattern. It proves that the fear, while present, does not have to dictate their actions. The mind is resistant to change because it seeks comfort in the familiar, even when the familiar is limiting. It convinces us that unless we can make a giant leap, there is no point in trying at all. But this is an illusion. A single small action, repeated over time, has the power to reshape everything. A person who believes they are not fit does not need to run a marathon on day one. They just need to go for a short walk. A person who struggles with self-doubt does not need to suddenly become confident overnight. They just need to take one small action in defiance of their fear. Each time you do something different, no matter how small, you disrupt the pattern. You prove to yourself that the limitation is not absolute, and the more you do this, the weaker the old belief becomes. What once felt impossible begins to feel, what once felt like an unchangeable truth reveals itself as just a habit of thinking. The mind thrives on repetition. Whatever you reinforce grows stronger. If you reinforce fear, fear grows. But if you reinforce action, no matter how small, a new path begins to form. And step by step, that path leads to transformation. Fear feels absolute. It feels like a wall, solid and unmovable, standing between you and the life you want. But fear is not reality. It is not a fact. It is a habit, an automatic response your mind has practiced for so long that it feels like truth. The moment you realize this, fear begins to lose its power. A child touches a hot stove once and learns to be careful. But what if that same child is told you are not smart, you are not capable, or you will fail? The mind records these messages just as it records the pain of touching something hot, and from that moment on it reacts with fear every time a challenge arises. Not because the challenge is dangerous, but because the mind has been conditioned to associate discomfort with failure. This is how fear becomes a habit. It is not warning you about the present, it is replaying the past. Most people believe they must eliminate fear before taking action. They wait to feel confident, wait to feel ready, wait for the fear to disappear. But fear does not leave first. It leaves after you take action. The person afraid of public speaking will not overcome their fear by thinking about confidence. They overcome it by speaking. The person afraid of failure will not gain courage by waiting. They gain courage by failing and realizing they can rise again. Fear is like a shadow. It grows when you turn away from it, but it shrinks when you walk toward it. The mind creates stories about what might happen, painting worst-case scenarios, convincing you that stepping outside your comfort zone is dangerous. But how many times in your life have you feared something, only to realize later that it wasn't as bad as you imagined? Fear magnifies the unknown, but the moment you face it, the illusion starts to crumble. Every great achievement, every moment of growth begins with someone acting despite fear. The difference between those who stay stuck and those who break free is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move forward with fear still present. Fear is not a stop sign. It is a test, asking whether you are willing to step beyond the illusion. And the moment you do, you prove to yourself that fear was never the truth. It was only a habit waiting to be broken. The present moment is the only place where real change can happen. The past is a memory, a collection of experiences and interpretations stored in your mind. The future is an idea, a projection of what might come. But neither the past nor the future has power over you unless you bring them into this moment. The mind, however, is rarely here. It clings to old failures, regrets, and wounds, or rushes ahead with anxiety about what could go wrong. And in doing so, it blinds you to the truth. Right now, in this moment, you are free. Imagine someone who has failed repeatedly in the past. Each time they try something new, their mind reminds them of every mistake, every shortcoming. It tells them, why bother? You always fail. If they listen, they hesitate, withdraw, and continue the same cycle. But what if they pause and ask themselves, is that failure happening right now? In this moment, is anything stopping them from taking action? The past only exists if they choose to carry it forward without that mental attachment. This moment is fresh, untouched, full of possibility. Think of a heavy backpack filled with stones. Each stone represents a past failure, a painful memory, a belief about what is possible. The weight slows you down, makes every step harder. But what happens if you put the backpack down? You don't need to fix each stone, analyze it, or figure out why it's there. You just need to let go. And the moment you do, you realize the weight was never part of you. You were carrying it unnecessarily. People often believe they need more time to change. They say, maybe next week, maybe next year, always postponing their transformation. But change does not exist in the future. The only moment where action, choice, and freedom exist is now. Right now you can take a step beyond your fear. Right now you can refuse to believe an old thought. Right now you can do one thing differently. Most people remain trapped not because they lack ability, but because they are not present. They are stuck in a mental world of past regrets and future worries. But when you fully step into the present, the limitations of the past dissolve, the fears of the future weaken, and in this moment, this single powerful moment, you have everything you need to break free when a negative pattern arises. Most people react automatically. A thought appears, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, this will never work. And without question, they accept it as truth. They feel the emotions that come with it, and before they know it, they are caught in the same cycle, repeating the same choices, reinforcing the same limitations. But what if, instead of reacting, you simply noticed? What if, for just one moment, you created space between the thought and your response? That space is where freedom begins. Imagine a person who always gets angry in certain situations. The moment someone criticizes them, their body tenses, their mind races, and they lash out, just like they have 100 times before. It happens so quickly that it feels automatic, as if they have no choice. But what if, just once they paused? What if, instead of reacting, they became aware? The anger is still there, but they observe it instead of acting on it. In that moment, they are no longer controlled by it. They have stepped outside the pattern. Most people think change requires force, that they must fight against their negative thoughts, push through their fears, or silence their doubts. But real change does not come from struggle. It comes from seeing. Seeing that your mind is producing the same reaction it always does. Seeing that your fear, hesitation, or frustration is just a conditioned response, not reality itself. And in seeing it, you create distance. Think of a movie screen. When you are fully absorbed in the film, you feel every emotion as if it's happening to you. But the moment you step back and remember, this is just a movie, the intensity fades. The same is true for your thoughts and reactions. When you are caught in them, they feel overwhelming, all-consuming. But when you observe them with awareness, you realize they are just passing mental events, not truths you must obey. Each time you pause instead of reacting, you weaken the pattern. Each time you notice a negative thought without immediately believing it, you reclaim control. Awareness gives you a choice. You can follow the old script, or you can step into something new. And the more you choose awareness, the less power the past has over you. The moment you stop reacting, you start transforming. A person who has lived their whole life in chains does not realize they are free the moment the chains are removed. Their mind still believes in the prison, still clings to the idea of limitation. Even with an open door in front of them, they hesitate, not because they are trapped, but because they believe they are. This is how negative patterns work. The limits you think are real were never real to begin with. They were taught, conditioned, repeated so many times that they became part of your identity. But what happens when you begin to question them? What happens when you realize that the rope holding you back was never tied? An elephant raised in captivity is often tied to a small stake in the ground. As a baby, it tries to break free, but the rope is too strong. Over time, it stops trying. Years later, that same elephant, now powerful enough to break free with ease, remains tied to the same small stake. Not because it lacks strength, but because it believes escape is impossible. The belief is stronger than the rope. Now, look at your own life. How many limitations are you still carrying that no longer have any real power? How many times have you told yourself, "I can't," without ever testing the truth of that statement? How many doors have been opened in front of you, yet you stayed still, convinced that you were not capable, not ready, not enough? The mind will try to keep you in the familiar, even if the familiar is painful. But the moment you realize the bars were only ever in your mind, you step into a new reality. Fear, self-doubt, hesitation, these are not walls, they are shadows. They look solid from a distance, but the closer you get, the more you realize they were never real. The only thing keeping them in place is belief. And belief can be changed. The first time you act in defiance of your old limitations, something shifts. You prove to yourself that you were never actually bound. Each step beyond fear, no matter how small, weakens the illusion. You were never trapped. The cage was only ever an idea. The rope was never tied. The limits were never real. And the moment you stop believing in them, they disappear. The patterns that hold you back are not real prisons. They are illusions strengthened by repetition. Fear, doubt, hesitation, these are not truths, only habits of the mind. The moment you recognize them for what they are, you create space to choose something different. Change does not require a monumental shift. It begins in a single moment of awareness, a single step beyond the familiar. You are not your past. You are not your thoughts. You are not the limitations your mind has practiced believing. You are the awareness behind it all, the presence that can observe, question, and ultimately break free. The chains that once seemed unbreakable were never locked. The walls that felt immovable were never real. The door to freedom has always been open. The door to freedom has always been open. The only thing left is for you to step through it.